we're going to be talking about future-ready skills from multi-generational workforce. And I'm really pleased Tia Cheang from Capstone Digital can talk to us about this. Can I just put a proposition to you that I read up on? The World Economic Forum said, and this makes me feel quite annoyed, Generation Z, or Z for some people, Gen Z in particular, is driving innovation. Therefore, meeting the full potential of tech-enabled business transformation will largely depend on this cohort. True, false, and how miserable is that for old-timers like me?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm also miserable for people in my group as well. I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's that they're driving innovation or that they are the large-scale consumers of that innovation, and there's that hunger for everything to be, at the leading edge of something new. I want the newest thing. I want the latest thing, and I think there's a little bit of a dopamine hit in that. They have a very short attention span, and so that is driving what they want to consume. And their expectations of what products are going to give them has really raised the bar. So from, old Gen Xers like me through to the millennials, and then, the Gen Zs, and then the Gen Alphas, now they want AI-driven everything in a way that we didn't have available to us, sort of 20 years ago. The things that you can have in your pocket now is much more advanced than what I could have had in the creaky old desktop that was sat under my desk. And so they are driving that innovation. Where I perhaps feel a little uncomfortable that they are, perhaps they're going to be the custodians of that delivery, is that whilst they have technology skills, they lack some of the softer skills to be able to make that delivery successful. So things around critical thinking, things around communication skills, things around just a general inquisitive nature isn't necessarily there. And I just find that with the young people that we're bringing on today, because they've been raised in this sort of ready-baked environment, what we expect them to be able to go off and invent in their minds. When I was my age, just when I was 20 years ago, I would go off and kind of go, how am I going to figure this out? Well, I'll have a tinker and eventually I'll get to the right answer. That isn't there now. And so they look at you to say, like, well, give me the task list of how I get there, because they're used to the technology essentially spoon feeding them the answers.
Precisely, yeah.
And that's where I sort of feel a little bit odds with the idea that they're going to deliver everything. I think, yes, ultimately, when we retire, they'll have to take over. But there's definitely a skills gap there that we need to address.
This must not be a Gen Z bashing session, but I own a couple of Gen Zers, and they're doing great, and I recognise some of the traits in my children that you describe. Is there not risk in that as well? Reaching for Google Gemini, ChatGPT, excellent applications, but in terms of business, there is risk in that.
Oh, absolutely. In everything from cybersecurity right through to general common sense. We look at data literacy and we look at AI and digital literacy. It goes right down to understanding that you can't necessarily trust everything that ChatGPT tells you. There's hallucinations in there. Going right through to, things like the kind of deep fake stuff where we've seen fraud happening, videos of chief execs telling you to wire them money, those sorts of things they need to be aware of. And so I do think there's a general awareness risk alongside the things like the cybersecurity risk. But I think realistically, people like myself made the problem. When I look at the young individuals now who are hooked on algorithms, who are, have short attention spans because they're used to this sort of constant now dopamine hit. Who made those algorithms? It was data people like me, and so I've got to step up and say, well, actually, I need to be able to retrofit some of those skills and some of that attention span back into the workplace so that I can have a workforce that's fit for tomorrow.
Looking at the whole wider workforce, I just sometimes wonder in my gloomier moments whether we are enjoying such an incredibly significant industrial revolution here that old dinosaurs like me just have to move out? And should I just walk off and set up a cabbage growing business or something? Because frankly, it is the younger generation. Should I recognise my time is over, my day is over?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you're right. I think we're at the, a new industrial revolution. The changes that are coming forward now are not a once in a generational piece. They are a once in a, era piece.
Yeah.
And yes, there will be a kind of lamplighter game change where total roles will be obsolete. And we're seeing it already happen with the likes of marketing, with the likes of comms and copywriters and things like that, where AI tools are now far more efficient, cheaper, and faster than having someone build your advertisements, for example. Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those roles then become entirely obsolete. It then becomes around, where do you pivot to? And I think that as we move towards a world where actually everything is sort of easy and accessible, and if I think about if we take software programming, for example, I'm not necessarily sure in 5 years' time there'll be that many software programmers, because vibe coding is so easy to do now and coding systems becoming so efficient. It then becomes around, well, actually, the value that you offer as an individual is in your expertise and how you use those tools and the strategic thinking, because there's a difference between being able to code and being able to architect something and engineer something. And there's a difference between tap, 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 and actually where's the design thinking. And so I think there's still a huge amount of value for people who are sort of further along in their career to sort of be the sort of, I don't know, chaperones of those younger individuals who are running away, doing their vibe coding, and actually, if everyone wants to run towards the end of the cliff, someone's got to say, hang on, guys, let's not. And that comes with experience.
So the good news is the end is not quite nigh for us old gimmers. So what I'm trying to lead to, which we do now, is do leaderships recognise this important balance? Are they hooked on the future with the new kids on the block? Do they recognise that actually the softer skills that you describe are going to be the things that make the deployment of new technology successful?
I think there's an awareness, but I sometimes I think you can be driving but not have a hand on the wheel. And I think that's where we are. So I know that everyone's sort of looking at, we can automate, we can get efficiencies, and we don't need to hire young graduates at the moment because the software can pick it up, or, I've got Copilot and I don't necessarily need to backfill. But I look at the vacuum that makes, because in 5 years' time or 3 years' time, those grads that we would have hired today would have been in the middle tier. And those that are in the middle tier will make the senior tier, and the senior tier will have retired. But what happens when you've then got a vacuum, because that sort of conveyor belt almost has not been fulfilled? So I do think we need to look at what we're doing to make sure that actually the future people are still making their way through, so that we don't have an era where actually those people who didn't do the foundational work don't have the experience to then build on. So we do need to look at that, but I do think there's also a space around what are we doing to do the pivot for those whose roles then become obsolete. I don't want to see a whole bunch of people who are 45, 50 suddenly unable to work because they don't have the digital literacy, they don't have AI literacy, they don't have the skills to be able to work until 68 now. And I do remember that is a long period of time before people are retiring. What do we do? You can't have 28 years of unemployment. So actually, where are you beginning to redeploy those? And I don't think we can rely entirely on the government to say, actually, well, there's an apprenticeship over there, or you can go off and do another master's, or whatever it happens to be. We need to be thinking about where are we going to redeploy those staff to, and actually what are we doing to give them real life skills? Because they're not all professionals. Some of them might be in a call center, some of them might be on front desk, and so on.
So this brings us neatly onto the bit about training and development and a strategic approach. Where do we even start with that?
I think for me, when we're looking at skills development, one, it has to be multi-generational. So you're not just looking at, how do we bring in young people, the apprenticeships and the master's programs. What are we doing for mid-career, and what are we doing for sort of put it politely, the twilight years. And, but also how are we making it persona focused? So when I'm thinking about, in my space, what am I doing around data skills? Well, not everyone needs deep technology skills. I don't need to send everyone off to go learn about Snowflake or about cloud. Sometimes it's about the application of those things. How do you use what the tools that I'm deploying or the products that I'm putting out there? And then other times it is about what do you need for your role? So if you are in the call center and I've put out some analytics, actually, what does that show you? What does good look like? Is the chart showing you something good? Is it something bad? And helping you to manage in your workplace with the new products that are out there. And so it is about the right fit, the right, I suppose, mode of delivery. So when I'm thinking about modalities, not everyone is a classroom learner. Some people like to do self-paced stuff. Some people like to do online learning. Some people, they learn better by shadowing. And so it is making sure that you have multiple modalities in terms of your delivery. It's making sure that you have training as a sort of skills for life. So you don't just learn when you're 18, 19, 20. You still want to be learning, one, because it's fulfilling, but two, because careers change. The way that we work changes, and so we need to have an up-to-date workforce. But it's also about the right skills for the right role. So you can't have one universal training program. And there's lots of ways that you can deliver that. Some of it, as I say, is the apprenticeship stuff, the master's degrees. Some of them, there's those higher train deploy schemes. Some of it is shadowing. But when I look at what we're looking at for AI at the moment, I think the recent stats said that over the next sort of 3 or 4 years, we're looking at around 650,000 new jobs in the UK around AI. Now, some of those will be backfill. They're not all going to be pure play AI roles. They could be in cloud. They could be cybersecurity. But of those, half of them will be dedicated AI roles, and they are net new roles. But if you look at what universities are pushing out, last year they only made 2,000 new master's and bachelor's grads in the AI space. So as businesses, if you realize that actually you're going to have demand out of that 300,000 net new roles, you're going to have to start training them yourself and thinking creatively about how do you cross-train? How are you attracting people who are coming back mid-career if they've had career breaks? How are you cultivating and helping people who might have domain expertise that is very useful? If you're building AI, you need domain expertise, but how can you take that business knowledge and apply it now in the AI space?
Can I just pick up on something you said, which I hadn't realized? Are our universities, and I don't know, possibly those in Europe and elsewhere, so woefully underprepared?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do, as part of my day job, I do a lot of parliamentary advisory.
Yeah.
And I spent sort of the last 6 months working on the digital skills consultation. And in the UK, we are better than the US. So the US only made 900 AI grads last year, and they're a much bigger country than we are and actually have a much bigger demand. But in terms of what it takes to deliver a curriculum, they have always been behind the times. Demand drives the curriculum.
Yep.
And as part of the digital skills consultation, we've been looking at it and kind of going, we know we need a workforce fit for tomorrow, and it's very different to the one we have today. So what does that look like? But I mean, I still look at it and go, well, okay, there'll be a report published in June, actually, has been launched in Westminster. And within that, we took around everything from young children, how they use AI, how they do prompt engineering, right through to what do we do for grads and, kind of career changes and those whose jobs will be made obsolete. And I know that even if we launched a curriculum today or a consultation and sort of began to plan that out, it would take 2-3 years to plan. It would then take a couple of years for the universities to develop a curriculum. And so you're not really going to see a change till probably 2030, 2035, where we'll see those people begin to come through. Because not only do you start a degree, it then takes you 3 years to finish the degree.
Yeah.
So we have a big vacuum now around what that looks like. And it essentially means that industry is going to have to start cultivating their own skills.
I was going to pick up on that. And slightly earlier today, Anik from CyberSafe, who's in the room, did the most brilliant keynote about the human factor in AI. And what if I don't misquote here, Anik? Tell me if I do. one of the figures you gave was 52% of people surveyed said they hadn't been given training in AI. I got that right, thank goodness. So if industry is going to take it on board, they're not doing a very good job at the moment.
No, I think there's I mean, from an industry perspective, you're always looking at your own P&L. And if I'm saying, and it's always been the case, training costs, and there's always a reluctance to kind of go, well, if I train someone, they're going to leave, which is, you know, the endless pushback that you hear from the exec and from the board. Well, it's expensive, and if we train them, they'll go somewhere else. I personally don't think that way. I think that if you give someone a fulfilling career and opportunities to develop within your company, they're much more likely to stay than if they get absolutely nothing. But this is a philosophy that isn't widely adopted. I mean, if I went back, 15 years ago, companies were much better in funding development. They had grad schemes, they had sponsorship schemes. There was a lot more in terms of internal training. You could go off and get certificates. Now they go, well, there's LinkedIn Learning. Go look at Pluralsight, and we've got a subscription. And I don't think that is fit for everything. Some stuff you can learn online, and it is good. But sometimes I think you need that back and forward that sometimes classrooms give you, where you're able to have a conversation with your trainer that, if you're doing something online through Pluralsight, it's a one-way ticket. You're getting told, but you can't come back and go, well, actually, I've got a question on that and I need to follow up on it, because, your presenter isn't real.
But there has clearly got to be the balance, which we've discussed earlier, between upskilling newcomers, possibly, to be our operatives and leaders of the future, but also the entire workforce.
Yeah.
And training the entire workforce for an AI future presents challenges that most companies, I suspect, would find daunting.
Yeah, and I think, it's a learning curve for everyone. I mean, I know AI has been around in a number of different guises for, almost 100 years now. Yeah. But in the latest guise, when most people talk about AI, what they really mean is generative AI. They're not talking about NLP. They're not talking about computer vision. They're talking about generative AI. And in that sense, everybody is learning. Like, they're finding the pitfalls. They're figuring out what needs to happen. And I think there probably needs to be a much more collaborative approach across industry and with the likes of myself in government, to sit down and kind of go, these are what we think, these are the questions we haven't quite figured out the answers to, and sharing some of that knowledge. I think historically there's been a lot of gatekeeping around, well, I don't want to share my ideas with you because you might steal them and run off with them. Yeah. I don't think we have that time to sort of stagnate, knowing that there's this vacuum, and knowing that the kind of universities' curriculums and the schools' curriculums are probably 8 years lagging. We're going to have to be a bit more collaborative.
As ever, and it's happened to me all day long, we've run out of time. I do have to call a halt. Help us draw this to a close then, Tia. What do companies need to do? What do they need to think about now and in the medium term to ensure a stable, cohesive, fully functioning, well-functioning, multi-generational workforce?
Yeah, for me, I think they are, in the short to medium term, and by that I mean the next 3 to 5 years, I think they're comfortable in terms of what's coming out of university. Just because our adoption curves are lagging behind where the technology is. Like, we're not necessarily ready to dive 2 feet into adoption for everything in AI. So it will take some time. I think where we really have the problem is the mid-career transitions, where, where we're looking at efficiencies being delivered today. It is efficiency, it's not role replacement. So it's about empowering a person to do the work of 4 people as opposed to no people. And for those roles where you're saying, well, actually, I'm going to streamline, I'm not going to backfill, what do we do in that space? And looking at how you begin to pivot some of those roles, whether they're in sales or they're in marketing or whatever, and begin to go, well, actually, what do I do with that person? Am I redeploying them into another area of the business? Or is their expertise valuable in the tech and AI space to help drive stuff out? I mean, we talked earlier about vibe coding. Actually, could I use that individual to help me prototype, to give me that support? Could they actually be trained up to be a product owner because they have deep domain expertise, and use them in that way? Because I think that's where we've historically fallen down, is that you know, tech and data people are very great at building stuff, but not necessarily great at engaging with the business, not necessarily great at, you know, understanding the problems in a real meaningful way. So I think actually taking those individuals and beginning to shape them for what you want now, so that actually when the time comes, you can maneuver them into a role that's, you know, probably quite fulfilling for them.
You're very positive. There's hope even for old Gibby like
I'm
me.
super optimistic.
Thank goodness. I shan't go out and learn to grow cabbages after all. I'll stick with it. Tia Cheang from Capstone Digital.
No, thank you.
Very much indeed for those insights.
It's been a pleasure.
Tia Cheang, ladies and gentlemen.